Welcome to Dying Out Loud. Some episodes have a guest, someone sitting across from me, sharing their story, their scars, their wisdom, and those conversations are everything to me. But every now and then, the story that needs to be told is mine. This is one of those episodes. I'm reading a letter I wrote to someone who was once my closest friend, someone who was there at the beginning of some of the best chapters of my life, and absent at the beginning of one of the hardest. When I got my stage 4 cancer diagnosis, she stepped away. And for a long time, I held that. I didn't understand it, and I grieved it on top of everything else I was already grieving. But then I learned something that changed the way I saw everything. She had lost her father to cancer not long after she stopped speaking to me, and suddenly the silence made a different kind of sense. This episode is about forgiveness, not the performative kind, not the kind you offer because someone asked for it, apologized, or made it easy, but the kind you offer because you need it. Because carrying resentment alongside a cancer diagnosis is a weight no one should have to bear. Because the people we love, even the ones that hurt us, deserve to be seen in their full humanity. And because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just let go. I'm Kris Saim. This is Dying Out Loud. And today, we're going there together. I wrote a letter not long ago to one of the most important friends of my life. It took me a long time to write it. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I had convinced myself for years that not saying it was the same as being at peace with it. It wasn't. I was sitting in the hospital infusion chair with 8 hours of chemotherapy ahead of me. The kind of day that has a way of burning through every excuse you've ever made for yourself. Every someday, every I've moved on. Every story you've told yourself about why you didn't need to say the thing you knew you needed to say. There's a particular kind of quiet that happens in those moments. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind. The kind that has a weight. The kind that strips away everything that isn't true. So I picked up a pen and I started writing. We hadn't ended badly. There was no explosion, no betrayal, no clean break I could point to. Just the slow, quiet drift that happens when two people stop choosing each other. And somewhere in that drift, I had told myself a story. That I was fine. That some relationships simply run their course. And that I had made peace with that loss. But sitting there in that chair with 8 hours and nowhere to hide, I finally had to admit something. I hadn't made peace. I'd just gotten very good at not looking at it. On that paper, I told her what our friendship had meant to me, what I had missed, what I was grateful for, and I offered something I hadn't been sure I was ready to offer. Not because she needed it from me, but because I finally understood that I needed it for myself. That's what today's episode is about. Not her, not the friendship, not even the letter. It's about what I learned after 30 years of helping other people work through the hardest moments of their lives, about what we're actually doing when we tell ourselves that we've forgiven someone, and what we're quietly losing when we haven't. Let me tell you what most of us believe about forgiveness. We believe it's something you have to give someone who has earned it, or at least someone who has acknowledged what they did. We believe it requires a conversation, maybe an apology, maybe some kind of mutual agreement that yes, this happened, and yes, we're past it now. We believe forgiveness is a transaction. And if the other person hasn't held up their end of it, if they haven't apologized, they haven't changed, they haven't even admitted there was anything to apologize for, then forgiveness feels not just impossible, it feels wrong. Like you'd be letting them off the hook. Like you were saying what happened just didn't matter. So instead, we wait. We wait for the apology that may never come. We wait for the acknowledgement, the moment of clarity, the phone call where they finally get it. And while we're waiting, we tell ourselves we've moved on. We tell ourselves we're fine. And we tell ourselves it just doesn't affect us anymore. But here's what 30 years of sitting across from human beings in their most honest moments has taught me. It always affects us. I've sat with executives who were still punishing their teams for a failure that happened years ago. Not consciously, not maliciously, but the trust just never fully came back. And they couldn't tell you exactly why. I've coached leaders who left organizations bitter and bruised, who showed up to their next role, giving maybe 80%, keeping just enough of themselves in reserve to stay safe. I've worked with managers who were so afraid of being hurt that they stopped being close enough to anyone to actually lead them. They weren't weak people. They weren't unaware people. They were people who had been genuinely hurt and who had made the completely understandable decision to protect themselves from ever being hurt again. And they were paying for that decision every single day. In their relationships, in their leadership, in the quiet ceiling they'd placed on their own potential without ever realizing they were the ones who built it. We have a phrase for what they were doing. We call it moving on. But moving on and letting go are not the same thing. Moving on means you stopped talking about it. Letting go means it no longer has a hold on you. And most of us, if we're honest, have done a lot of the first and very little of the second. I know, because I was one of them. I had a whole story about why my friendship had faded, a reasonable story, a mature story, a story that made me sound like someone who understood that people grow apart, life gets complicated, and sometimes these things happen. It was a good story. It was also a way of never having to feel the full weight of the loss. And it took that hospital chair, 8 hours, and nowhere left to hide, for me to finally ask myself the question that I had been avoiding. Not, do they deserve my forgiveness? But, what has holding on to this cost me? What has holding on to this cost me? It sounds like a simple question, but it isn't. Because most of us have never actually sat with it. We've asked, why did this happen? What did I do wrong? Why won't they just admit it? But we rarely turn the lens on ourselves. Not to assign blame, not to rehash the wound, but to honestly inventory what we've been carrying and what it's been quietly taking from us. So let me offer you a different way of thinking about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not absolution. It doesn't mean what happened was acceptable. It doesn't require a conversation, a reconciliation, or even any contact with the other person at all. It isn't a gift you give to someone who hurt you. Forgiveness is a decision you make for yourself. It's the moment you decide to stop allowing someone else's actions, something that happened in the past, something you cannot change, to determine the size of your life today. I'm going to say that again. Forgiveness is the moment you decide to stop allowing someone else's actions, something that happened in the past, something you cannot change, to determine the size of your life today. Because I think a lot of us have been so focused on whether the other person deserves our forgiveness that we completely missed who's actually being punished while we're deciding. It's us. Every unresolved wound we carry becomes a filter through which we see the world, a lens we don't even know we're looking through. It shapes how much trust we extend to new people. How much of ourselves are we willing to risk? How fully we love, how freely we lead, how present we are in the moments that actually matter. We think we're protecting ourselves. And in a way we are, but we're also shrinking ourselves quietly, incrementally, in ways that are almost impossible to see from the inside. In my work, I always start in the same place with every person I coach. Before we talk about strategy, before we talk about goals, before we talk about what they really want to achieve, I try to understand the human dynamic. Who is this person really? What are they actually carrying? Because in my experience, the presenting problem is almost never the real problem. The real problem is usually older. It's usually quieter. It's usually something they've gotten so used to working around that they've forgotten it's there. And when I finally help someone see it, really see it, the question I ask them is the same. Who owns this now? Not who caused it, not who was wrong, but who owns it now? Because that's the only question that leads anywhere useful. You cannot go back and change what happened. You cannot force an apology that isn't coming. You cannot rewrite the past. The only thing you have any power over is what you choose to carry forward. That's what forgiveness really is. It's an act of ownership, a declaration that says, I refuse to let something I cannot change continue to cost me something I cannot afford to lose. And here's what I've learned, both from all those years in coaching rooms and from my own life. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to release you and realize that you were always the one holding the key, everything changes. Not overnight, not without grief. The grief is real, and it deserves to be honored. You are allowed to mourn what was lost. You are allowed to acknowledge that it hurt. Forgiveness doesn't ask you to pretend otherwise. It just asks you one question. Are you ready to stop letting that pain set the ceiling on your life? Because here's the truth I've seen over and over and over again in boardrooms and coaching sessions and quiet conversations that ran way past the scheduled hour. The most powerful leaders I have ever known are not the ones who never got hurt. They're the ones who refuse to be defined by it. They're the ones who did the hard, unglamorous, deeply human work of looking at what they were carrying and making a conscious choice about what they were willing to put down. That work doesn't happen in a boardroom, and it doesn't happen in a strategy session or a performance review. For me, it happened in that infusion chair with 8 hours, a pen, and a friendship I wasn't willing to leave unfinished. I want to tell you about that letter before I read it to you. When I sat down in that infusion chair and picked up my pen, I thought I was going to write something gracious, something warm and measured, something that said, I've thought about you, I value what we had, I hope you're well. It was safe, it was generous, and it was finished. But that's not what came out. What came out was the truth. And the truth was messier and more tender than I had prepared for. Because when you finally stop managing a loss and actually feel it, really feel it, you realize how much energy you've been spending to keep it at arm's length. How much of yourself you've been quietly rationing to make sure it didn't hurt too much. I wrote about what her friendship had meant to me, not in abstract terms, but specifically. The particular ways she had shown up in my life, the conversations that had stayed with me, the version of myself I had been when we were close, and how much I had valued that version. I wrote about the drift, about how I had watched the distance grow and told myself it was mutual, that it was natural, that it was nobody's fault. Because that story was easier than admitting that I missed her, that I had missed her for a long time. And then I wrote the part I hadn't planned to write. I told her I forgave her, not for anything specific, because honestly, the wound between us wasn't clean enough for that. It was the kind of hurt that accumulates slowly, in small moments, in things said and unsaid, and the particular way a friendship can fail you without either person ever quite meaning for it to. I forgave her for all of it. The specific things and the unnamed things. The things she knew about and the things she probably didn't. And then, and this is the part that surprised me the most, I asked for her forgiveness too. Because here's what the honest accounting of a lost friendship reveals. If you're willing to look at it clearly, it's almost never entirely one-sided. I had my own part in the drift, my own moments of not choosing her, my own ways of letting the distance become comfortable because it was easier than the vulnerability of reaching back across it. Sitting in that chair with the IV in my port and nowhere to be and nothing to protect, I could finally see my part clearly, and I could finally own it. That letter took me most of those 8 hours to write. When I finally set the pen down, when I read it back and knew it was true, all of it, every word, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not relief exactly, though there was some of that. It was more like space, like something that had been taking up room inside me for years had finally been acknowledged and released. Like I had been quietly clenching something in my fist for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to open my hand. I never sent it. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I never sent it. She doesn't know it exists. And yet something in me shifted permanently in the writing of it. Because that was never really the point. The sending of it, the receiving of it, the response that may or may not ever come. The point was getting it out of my head and onto paper. Giving it a place to live outside of me. Acknowledging in my own handwriting what was true about her, about me, about what we had been to each other, and what we had lost. That letter eventually found another life. I built this podcast episode around it, reading it without naming her, without identifying her, just offering it to whoever might need to hear it, whoever might be carrying their own version of what I had been carrying. I don't know if it'll ever find its way to her. I may never know. And here's what I've come to understand. That's not the important part. The important part is that I finally said the thing. Not for her, not for an audience, not for any response, resolution, or reward. I said it because carrying it had cost me enough. Because the friendship deserved to be honored, even if only I would ever known it had been. Because some things need to be said not for the hearing of them, but for the saying of them. It doesn't require a witness, doesn't require an acknowledgement, and it doesn't require the other person to receive it, accept it, or even know it exists. It only requires you. I've spent 30 years telling people that the most important investment they will ever make is in their own capacity to show up fully, openly, without the armor of old wounds. I believed it. I taught it, and I coached hundreds of people toward it. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped applying it to myself. That infusion chair has a way of making that very hard to ignore. There's something clarifying about sitting in a hospital with hours to fill and the particular awareness that time is not, in fact, unlimited. Has a way of reorganizing your priorities with a speed and efficiency that no leadership seminar ever could. It asks you quietly, without drama, what actually matters? Who actually matters? And what you've been waiting for that you could choose to stop waiting for right now. I chose to stop waiting. And what I found on the other side of that letter wasn't a response. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't closure in the way that we usually mean that word, as if closure is something someone else hands you when they're finally ready. What I found was something I hadn't expected and couldn't have planned for. I found myself again, a version of myself that had been quietly missing, a version that wasn't managing the loss anymore, but had finally, fully felt it, honored it, and chosen to move forward anyway. Not because she asked me to, not because she even knows, but because I finally understood that forgiveness was never about her at all. I'd like to share the letter with you. To the friend who left, there are friendships that mark you, that leave an imprint so deep you carry them long after the person is gone. Ours was one of those. I've been thinking about you lately, not with bitterness, though I'd be lying if I said the hurt wasn't real. Mostly, I've been thinking about us, the version of us that existed before life got complicated and hard. I think about where it all started, a swim-up bar at Live Aqua in Cancun. Of all the places in the world, of all the bar stools we could have chosen, we ended up next to each other. And from that first conversation, something clicked. We were virtually inseparable from that moment on. Two people who recognized something in each other and never really let go. What followed were years of the world opening up to us together. London, wandering around without a plan, the gray skies somehow making everything feel more cinematic. In Paris, where we pretended, at least for a few days, that we were different versions of ourselves, more sophisticated, more unhurried. In Amsterdam, where we laughed until our side ached at things I can't even fully remember now, only the feeling of them. I think about the trails we hiked, the way the world goes quiet when you're deep enough in the woods that nothing else exists. No noise, no demands, just your breath and the ground beneath your feet. The camping trips where we stayed up too late, talking about everything and nothing. The kind of conversations that only happen under an open sky. And then there was the chapter I never could have predicted, the one where life conspired to make us neighbors. We had traveled the world together, but we'd never lived in the same town until we both found ourselves rebuilding after divorce. Ending up next to each other felt like the universe winking at us. Those years of borrowed cups of coffee, balcony conversations, and the particular comfort of knowing your person was just a few steps away. That was something I will always treasure. What a gift that season was. Those memories are mine. They always will be. When I got my diagnosis, stage 4, I needed the people I loved most. I won't pretend your absence didn't land like a second blow. It absolutely did. There were moments I reached for you in my mind, the way that you reach for something that should be there, only to find empty space. But here's what I've come to understand, and what softens everything for me. Not long after we stopped speaking, you lost your father to cancer. I didn't know it then the way I know it now, and I am so deeply, profoundly sorry that I wasn't there for you when that happened. You were carrying your own unbearable weight, and I was absent for it, just as you were absent for mine. That symmetry breaks my heart a little. I think I understand now. The thought of watching someone else you loved, someone still living, fight the same disease that was taking your father may have simply been more than you could hold. Grief has a way of making us protect ourselves in ways we can't explain or control. You were faced with losing two people you loved most to this same cruel thing, at the same time. I don't know that I can imagine that weight, but I can certainly honor it. Of asking why, I'm choosing to extend what I hope you would extend to me. Grace, I forgive you for stepping away, and I ask that you forgive me too for not being there when your father passed, for not finding a way to reach across the silence when you needed someone most. I carry that. What I know more than anything is that you were one of the great joys of my life for a long time. The friendship we had was real. Born spontaneously at that swim-up bar in Cancun and built across years, continents, hiking trails, campfires, and a shared wall. Real things deserve to be honored, even when they're over. So today, I'm setting this down. The hurt, the questions, the silence. I'm replacing it with what I know to be true. We had something rare. We saw the world together. We were, for a long time, exactly what the other one needed. A soulmate. I wish you well, genuinely, fully, without reservation. I hope you find peace with whatever you were carrying. I hope you feel your father's presence in the quiet moments. I hope you have people around you who love you without conditions. And I hope somewhere in the stillness, you feel the gratitude I'm sending your way for everything we shared. That is what remains for me. Gratitude and love, with forgiveness and a full heart. Kris, I want to ask you something, and I want you to take it seriously. Not as a rhetorical question, not as a nice thought to carry out of your car, the room you're sitting in, and set down somewhere on the way, but as something worth sitting with, really sitting with. Who are you still giving power to? Who is living rent-free in the space where your full potential should be? Whose voice shows up uninvited in the moments that matter most, whispering that you should hold back, stay safe, keep just enough of yourself in reserve to avoid being hurt again? It might be someone who betrayed you, someone who left, someone who stayed but made you wish they hadn't. It might be a friend you lost to the slow drift of time and unspoken things. It might be a leader who diminished you, a colleague who undermined you, a relationship that ended without the conversation it deserved. Or it might be something quieter than that, a moment you never fully forgave yourself for, a decision you've replayed so many times it's worn a groove in you, a version of yourself you've never quite been able to extend the same grace you'd offer anyone else. We talk a lot in leadership about presence, about showing up fully, about bringing your whole self to work and the people who depend on you. But you cannot bring your whole self anywhere if there are pieces of you still stuck in rooms that you haven't been willing to leave. Forgiveness is how you leave those rooms. Not by pretending the pain wasn't real, not by excusing what was inexcusable, not by manufacturing a feeling you don't have yet, but by making a conscious, deliberate decision that what happened in the past will not be allowed to set the ceiling on what's possible today. You don't need to send a letter. You don't need to make a phone call, have a conversation, or seek any kind of acknowledgement from anyone. You don't need the other person to be sorry, to understand, or to even know that you've done this. You might just need a pen and a piece of paper and enough quiet to finally say the true thing. I sat in an infusion chair with 8 hours and nowhere to hide, and I wrote words I was never sure anyone would read or hear, but I wrote them anyway. Not because I was certain of what would happen, not because I had figured it all out. I had finally asked myself the only question that mattered. What is this costing me? And I'd finally been honest enough to answer it. The most powerful leaders I've ever known, the ones who lasted, the ones who grew, the ones who built something real with the people around them, were not the ones who were never wounded. They were the ones who refused to be defined by their wounds. They were the ones who did the hard, quiet, deeply human work of looking honestly at what they were carrying and making a conscious choice about what they were willing to put down. Is available to every single one of us. Not someday, not when the other person finally comes around, not when the circumstances are right, or the timing is better, or you feel ready enough. Now. Because here's what I know after 30 years of this work, and after one very long day in a hospital chair with a pen in my hand and the full weight of an unfinished thing finally in front of me. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to release you, and you realize that you were always the one holding the key, everything changes. Not everything gets resolved. Not every relationship gets restored. Not every wound disappears cleanly or quickly or completely. But you get yourself back. And that, every single time, is worth it. Forgiveness is not for them. Never was. It's for you. It's for the life you haven't let yourself fully live yet. It's for the leader you're still becoming. It's for every relationship that deserves the version of you that isn't quietly guarded, quietly grieving, quietly waiting for permission to move forward. You don't need permission. You never did. Folks, if you've been sitting with this one, I understand. I sat with it too, for so much longer than I'd like to admit. Forgiveness is not absolution. It's not pretending the hurt didn't happen or that the absence didn't cost you something real. It's not a gift you give to the person who wounded you. It's a gift you give to yourself. The moment I stopped waiting for an explanation, stopped needing her to show up and make it right before I could release it, was the moment something in me exhaled, and I realized that forgiveness had been available to me the entire time. I just had to choose it. I also had to reckon with my own absence. She lost her father while I was lost in my own survival. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. And the truth, when you're brave enough to sit with it, has a way of making compassion feel less like a sacrifice and more like the only logical response. So wherever you are in your own story, whatever you're holding, whoever you're holding it against, I want to ask you one question before you go. What would it feel like to set it down? Not for them, but for you. Just sit with that. If this episode moved you, share it with someone who might need it. Leave a review. Reach out. I read every message. You are not alone in the hard stuff. That's exactly why we are here. I'm Kris Saim. Thank you for dying out loud with me. Until next time, live fully, love honestly, and let go of what no longer serves you.